earlier when you talked about criminality and creativity trends in men peaking at 14, it reminded me of something you said. I think it was Joe Rogan talking about SJWs and kind of and how they create their own chaos, talking about how adolescents have this drive to change the world. And I was wondering if those three, the criminality, creativity, drive to change the world, are linked, and if so, if they manifest differently in men and women, and if they kind of come from the same area.
Well, I think they are linked, but I'm going to concentrate more on the second part of your question. So I'm going to ask you guys to think about something. So I talked to a friend of mine the other day. He's a very, very smart guy, and we've been talking about, well, all the sorts of things that we've been talking about tonight for a long time, and we were talking about the relative evolutionary roles of men and women. This is speculative, obviously, and because our research did indicate, it's tentative research so far, that the SJW sort of equality above all else philosophy is more prevalent among women. It's predicted by the personality factors that are more common among women. So agreeableness and high negative emotion, primarily agreeableness. But in addition, it's also predicted by being female. And that's interesting because in most of the personality research that I've done, and as far as I know in the literature more broadly speaking, most of the time you can get rid of the attitudinal differences between men and women, or at least reduce them by controlling for personality. So if you take a feminine man and a masculine woman, then, the poles reverse. But that didn't seem to be the case with political correctness. And so I've been thinking about that a lot because, well, men are bailing out of the humanities like mad, and pretty much out of the universities except for STEM. The women are moving in like mad, and they're also moving into the political sphere like mad. And this is new, right? We've never had this happen before, and we do not know what the significance of it is. It's only 50 years old. And so we were thinking about this, and so I don't know what you think about this proposition, but imagine that historically speaking, it's something like women were responsible for distribution and men were responsible for production. Something like that. And maybe that's only the case really in the tight confines of the immediate family, but that doesn't matter because that's most of the evolutionary landscape for human beings anyways. What the women did was make sure that everybody got enough. Okay, and that seems to me to be one of the things that's driving, at least in part, the SJW demand for equity and equality. It's like, let's make sure everybody has enough. It's like, well, look, fair enough, I mean, you can't argue with that. But there's an antipathy between that and the reality of differential productivity, because people really do differ in their productivity. So, all right, so to answer your question fully, I do think that the rebellious tendency of adolescence is associated both with that criminality spike, especially among men, and with creativity. Yes. I think that the SJW phenomena is different, and I think it is associated, at least in part, with the rise of women to political power. And we don't know what women are like when they have political power, because they've never had it. I mean, there's been queens, obviously, and that sort of thing. There's been female authority figures, and females have wielded far more power historically than feminists generally like to admit. But this is a different thing, and we don't know what a truly female political philosophy would be like. But it might be, especially if it's not been well examined and it isn't very sophisticated conceptually. It could easily be, well, let's make sure things are distributed equally. Well, yeah, but sorry, that's just not going to fly.
Do you think in terms of the West with the SJWs, and you talked about last lecture as well, creating chaos when there is none, otherwise it'd be static, do you think there would be any validity in saying that in a country like Canada where we're pretty gender equal, is there any merit to thinking SJWs are trying to create chaos even when there arguably is none on a mass level? Obviously there's still problems.
Why would they do that?
Otherwise it would be static. And that drive,
well,
it wouldn't, but I'm just
wondering.
So
I read this quote once, and I don't remember who said it. It might have been Robert Heinlein, for crying out loud, science fiction author. That springs to mind, but it probably wasn't. And the proposition was that men tested ideas and that women tested men. And I kind of like that. There's something about that, And now, obviously, it's an overgeneralization, but we also don't know to what degree women test men sheerly through provocation. It's a lot, because if you want to test someone, You don't have a like little conversation with them. Like you poke the hell out of them and you say, okay, like I'm going to like go after you and see where your weak spots are. And it seems to me that in this constant protest and use of shame and all of that goes along with this sort of radical movement towards egalitarianism, that there's a tremendous amount of provocation. And God, I'm going to say this too, even though I shouldn't. But I don't believe this, but I'm trying to figure it out. You know, I thought it was absolutely comical when 50 Shades of Grey came out. Eh? I just thought that was just so insanely comical that at the same time, there's this massive political demand for like radical equality and say with regards to sexual behavior, and the fastest selling novel the world had ever seen was S&M Domination, right? It's like, oh, well, we know where the unconscious is going with that one, don't we? And sometimes I think, like, because one of the things that I've really tried to puzzle out, and it's not like I believe this, right? I'm just telling you where the edges of my thinking have been going, is that you have this crazy alliance between the feminists and the radical Islamists that I just do not get. It's like the feminists, it's like why they aren't protesting nonstop about Saudi Arabia is just completely beyond me. Like I do not understand it in the least. And I wonder too, I just wonder bloody well, this is the Freud in me, is like, is there an attraction, you know, is there an attraction that's emerging among the female radicals for that totalitarian male dominance that they've chased out of the West? And I mean, that's a hell of a thing to think, but after all, I am psychoanalytically minded, and I do think things like that. Because, like, I just can see no rational reason for it. The only other rational reason is that, well, the West needs to fall, and so the enemy of my enemy is...
My friend,
exactly. Now, what is it? I got that wrong, but...
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yes, exactly.
And that's why Islamists tend to vote liberal as well.
Yes, well, so that could be the case. But I'm not going to shake my suspicion about this unconscious balancing, because as the demand for egalitarianism and the eradication of masculinity accelerates, there's going to be a longing in the unconscious for the precise opposite of that, right? The more you scream for equality, the more your unconscious is going to admire dominance. And so, well, that's how you think if you're psychoanalytically minded. And, you know, I'm a great admirer of Freud. He knew a hell of a lot more than people like to think. And so, which is partly why everyone still hates him, even though it's been 100 years since he's, you know, really been around. So, all right, we should stop.
It's so primitive. These conceptions, this idea that identity is your choice, is such... Identity isn't your choice when you're 3 years old on a playground for the first time. Identity is negotiated with other people, which even the bloody social constructionists admit. The idea that it's a whim, that it's something you choose on the basis of your personal, of a personal feeling is... Really, it's that level of understanding is approximately the developmental level of a 2-year-old. And I mean that technically, because generally 2-year-olds aren't capable of putting themselves in someone else's place, or they're not as capable as they will be. Yeah. And so the idea that you can just impose your identity on me that's completely insane. We negotiate our identities with other people all the time.
Well, this is actually something I've been mulling over as well. The idea of gender roles, and I haven't really fully formulated this thought process yet, but since I've got you, I thought I'd run it by you. I don't understand how they can claim there are more than two genders, because as far as I can tell, gender is like a handshake. You know, it's a series of cues and signals. For example, like if I take a lady out to dinner, I'll pull the chair out so she can sit down. She knows what she's supposed to do because there's an understanding from just previous context of our lives. And if I don't say pull the chair out and she's expecting me to do so, then I failed. She may well be like effectively holding out her hand to be shaken, and I'm not taking the hand and shaking it, and so. For them to unilaterally say, right, okay, there are thousands of genders, and genders are all social construct, they're all performative in nature, they're all, everyone's basically a tabula rasa and they can just choose whichever they want. It's obviously not true, because I mean, if I don't, it's not like, say, it's a two-way street. It's, if I don't know what I'm supposed to do with someone who identifies as a demi-girl or whatever, you know, pick a random made-up gender that they've got. If I don't know what the process around that is, then we don't have a gender interaction. We don't have a handshake.
Okay, so while you put your finger on an essential weakness in the philosophy, it's like, first of all, the idea that gender identity is independent of biological sex is insane.
Yeah,
it's wrong. It's wrong. Mm-hmm. The scientific data they're not only clear, they're clear beyond dispute. It's as bad as claiming that the world is flat, in my estimation. Now, having said that, there are masculine women and there are feminine men. If you look at temperament, for example. Mm-hmm. So, on average, men are less agreeable and lower in neuroticism than women. And so they're lower in negative emotion and they're lower in compassion and empathy. They're more competitive. Now, the differences there aren't massive. So, for example, if you take a random man and a random woman from the population and you guessed that the woman was more agreeable than the man, you'd be right 60% of the time, but wrong 40%.
Yeah.
And if you took a random man and a random woman out of the population and you guessed that the woman was more agreeable than the man, you'd be wrong 40% of the time. So there's a lot of overlap. And so you can have men with quite feminine temperaments and women with quite masculine temperaments. But they still have all sorts of other differences that characterize them. Okay, now,
yeah,
so there is biological grounding, there is variability, and then there is a sociological element, which is what you were talking about. Mm-hmm. But what you put your finger on is and this is something that damn postmodernists agree among themselves, is that, okay, let's say that gender is performative. All right, so that makes it into a kind of agreed upon social game. But that's the thing, it's an agreed upon social game.
Yeah.
You don't adopt the role because it suits how you feel. You adopt the role so that you can use it as a tool to maneuver with in society. I mean, that's why the transsexual guys often come out as extraordinarily feminine. You know, they wear dresses, they wear high heels, they put on makeup. None of that's biologically instantiated, or if it is, it's only to a limited degree. Mm-hmm. You know, but they adopt those roles because people know how to play the game. Yeah. And so the thing about identity is that identity is a set of tools that you use to operate with in the world. And if those tools don't function, you don't have a functional identity. Well, yeah, it isn't just something that you put on because you